Hi, everyone. Welcome to UBBA Unplugged. And our special guest this time on our episode is Rob Schwartz, the president and CEO of Anterix and a founding member of the Utility Broadband Alliance. You know, Rob, you and I kind of started this conversation about 5 years ago. And we talked early about the early days of the evolution of private LTE for utility operations around grid modernization and the future of the grid. And from those early discussions, way back, Distributech 2019, the idea of UBBA was really born. And then down in Birmingham, Alabama, that same summer, a handful of pioneering utilities, innovative technology companies like Anterix came together at Birmingham, and really the idea caught fire. But a lot's changed, and the last 5 years have been very eventful. Take a few minutes and share with our viewers your perspective on some of those key milestones over the last 5 years.
Absolutely, and I have to start that with gratitude, Bobbi. First of all, thanking you for the really critical role that you've played from that beginning and way before. As your background couldn't have been any more perfect to have stepped into this new entity and shepherded from what I see as kind of a garage startup, in a different way. I'm in the startup business to help build valuable entities that provide real meaningful purpose within our society, and what you've done, really bringing us through these 5 years that I know we'll talk about in detail has really just been tremendous. As I always like to say, the heart of the Utility Broadband Alliance, in your leadership. So thank you for that. Really, as a start, it wouldn't be anywhere without that. So really going back to what you're referencing, the early days, and absolutely 2019 was kind of that pivotal moment. But even going back a few years before that, when we were out visiting utilities to talk about what they were doing in communications, I always say, we had the fortunate position to talk to the key folks in the telecom groups, in the technology leadership in each of these utilities, and we saw the budding needs, the growing needs back then. Even a few years before, it took us a while to get that foundational group, which was those 8 founding members, and talk about gratitude. If we hadn't come together in that first effort in 2019, first at that clandestine Distributech meeting we had in a no-windowed conference room somewhere upstairs, felt like we were doing something illicit, dreaming big about what we could do together. Because as we visited utilities around the country and heard they were trying to solve similar problems, we realized at that level they weren't working together. And this is an industry that has such a great history of collaborating and solving big problems together. It's just that this particular teams weren't yet in the same room talking about this. And so with the really critical advanced leadership of Southern Company, right? Because Southern, I always describe them as the crystal ball, right? Southern Company, Southern Link, then led by Tammy Barron and the team of Mike Rosenthal and Alan McIntyre and others, were already ahead because they were already starting. They the only utility in the nation back then that had broadband spectrum, that valuable asset that we were then still pursuing at the FCC on behalf of the industry. And so, for us to then go into for them to host us in Birmingham, Alabama, for what was the first, Utility Broadband Alliance UBBA summit back then. They opened their doors. They lined up all their applications. They lined up their engineers to demonstrate them. They took us on a field tour. It was priceless for us to be able to see the future, right? It wasn't kind of dreaming about a technology, what it could do. We could actually see it substantively what it was doing. And that opening pitch that Tammy Barron gave to all of us about, this is the workhorse and the essential need for broadband communications. That was exactly what really was to me the big kickstart, and what allowed us to grow from 8 members in 2019, I think quickly to 35, and now well over 100. And so at the same time, pivotal events for us. A year later, 2020, was the FCC 900 megahertz broadband ruling, which was us on behalf of the industry with all these utilities that were then weighing in during what was actually another 5-year period from when we started that until we actually got the rights to use spectrum. So we were really just dreaming in 2019 about what we could do if only we had spectrum. And utilities had been asking regulators for it for a long time, but it wasn't until we had this opportunity to repurpose 900 And that took the participation of 900 megahertz incumbents, then some that were initially opposition, many of whom are now users of the spectrum, incredibly strong members and board members of UBBA were those who at that time didn't yet even realize the need, and now are embracing it and part of this really collective vision and driving us forward. So it's been a wild ride during that time. To me, other milestones was really the transition of the industry, right? I mean, we're only a catalyst to helping solve these big issues and challenges that the industry is having. So the technology is just technology. It's spectrum. It's circuit boards and things that do stuff. But what it's really doing is trying to build a foundation to solve these growing challenges of the industry. And so the utilities are retooling themselves during this 5-year period at the same time. And so we're seeing chief innovation officers and chief strategy officers and new chief technology officers that are bringing in new skill sets to utilities so that they can harness technology to solve these critical issues of resiliency and decarbonization and cybersecurity, dealing with increasing weather incidents. So that the need is so much stronger. So, I think the last point kind of along these 5 years to me is that the escalation of telecom within the utility, the importance of it. And we watched it happen in IT in enterprise around the globe, right? IT used to be a little basement function that people just who plugged in the computers and made them work. And now it's a strategic weapon in the boardroom, right? IT drives companies to fail and succeed. And it's the same thing now that telecom has got escalated to that level that in most utilities. We're watching that rise during those 5 years, the recognition that broadband communications and the need for private is critical to solving all of these big challenges going forward.
Absolutely, Rob. Thank you. I think you really summed up the milestones, but listening back to that took me right back. I'm thinking, gosh, it was an amazing 5 years. A lot of really those key milestones, and you forget how much we had to work and pull together. And that's really the heart of UBBA too, is that collaboration and that pulling together for the betterment of the utility industry. Have there been surprises to you, things that you went, I didn't expect that over the last 5 years? Any surprises you want to share?
Yeah, absolutely. The utility industry embraces the word resiliency, right? Which is really just a critical, part of the DNA of the sector, right? Which, as everyone knows, it means, when something happens, when an incident occurs, it's not that it shakes you to your core and you freeze in your tracks. Just the opposite. You've thought about how you're going to deal with these kind of things, and it's how fast you bounce back, right? It's the speed at which you can be resilient and come back. And I think, that's the nature of what, to me, the surprise over these 5 years. There's been, a long list of things like, that little thing of COVID that had us, all shut down, and the challenge of getting workforce to do all the critical things that utilities did, and the vital tools like we're using now that suddenly got adopted so deeply of different kinds of communication using electronics and data to enhance the capabilities. I think it really drove to a whole new level of adoption of technology and the realization that technology is what's going to help us get through these things. So that was one. I mean, obviously we've had wars, we've had, horrible economic issues that have gone on. So really traumatic things that have had real economic impact, that had real personal impact. We've had wildfires, right? We've had, horrible storms, increasing weather incidences. At the same time, we also have, on the positive side, significant commitments during those 5 years about decarbonization goals by our nation, by our utilities, all setting us on kind of a different trajectory. So I would say those are absolutely surprises. You didn't plan for them, but it's a testament to the industry to be able to deal with all of those in the way that the industry is tooled up and deal with them collectively, right? I mean, even way outside of other, right? All the things that happen with mutual aid, just part of the DNA, and there's cyber mutual aid that's overseen by EEI, and there's all of this collective effort to say we're not in this alone as individual utilities. We're going to collectively solve it. It's such a unique sector that way, and that's really we didn't invent that DNA for UBBA. We actually adopted it and expanded it into this whole sector. And I think that's why it was such a natural thing and why we've seen this phenomenal growth to go into UBBA. Absolutely, the success, I wouldn't say it's a surprise, but you can't be any more delighted. I describe it as kind of sending your kid off to college. We seeded UBBA, in the early days, like that garage startup, out of our pocket, saying, we can't do this for long, but we'll put the seed money in just to kickstart it, but it's got to be self-funding. I remember talking to you when you joined us initially about saying, this is not an Anterix job at all. We want to get this going and we want to hand it to the utilities to let them govern its future. And, there were doubters back then. There were people who embraced it and joined in, but I couldn't be any happier during that time. The surprise, I guess, or the satisfaction is probably a better word, is that we got through that difficult period of spinning it out, making it fully independent, establishing a board of great utility leaders and industry companies that are also helping in that front. And it's on such a solid footing. The level of support that we've seen, the annual events have been mind-blowing. They really have been. The scale of participation. I really like seeing that the dialogue has changed. The early days, it was about, can we get this equipment? Can we get this spectrum? The technical, can we plug these things together? And that was vital then. Now, overshadowing that is about, we know we can do it, right? I've talked about Southern doing it. We've got utilities in 15 states deploying on 900 megahertz today. I mean, that's incredible. That's a big footprint. It's the biggest footprint of private broadband in the world, I think, from what I've seen. And so when you think about that as the foundation, we're now talking about applications. We're talking about outcomes and solutions. And I love seeing, the senior leadership that you've been able to bring in to, from the host utilities and otherwise in these forums where they're not talking about circuitry or radios or spectrum. They're talking about, how can I make my utility more efficient, more resilient, more environmentally secure with decarbonization, and how am I going to connect up these new sources of distributed energy and battery storage, and that's driving the inspiration for all of us at UBBA to continue to innovate. Right? UBBA is not about just solving a problem today. It's about how do we over the next decades use this valuable tool to solve today's problems. But we know, that's kind of back to the surprises. There'll be plenty of other surprises. There'll be things that we haven't thought about that'll come up. I mean, I've lived through the telecom evolution in mobile, from 1G now to 5G and soon 6G, and I've watched people saying, I'm going to make phone calls, but I don't need that text messaging thing, right? That's that's what they do in Europe, and suddenly, everybody's text messaging. I'm never going to watch video on a phone, and now everybody's watching video, and so the adoption of technology has curves that are getting smaller and smaller as a result of some of the things that have forced the adoption, as I talked about. So it's exciting, plenty of surprises, but I think I'm excited about what's ahead in both surprises and opportunities.
And absolutely, I echo all of that. And you lead to really my final question, but certainly not the final part of the discussion is, so let's talk about the future. I know it's, break out your crystal ball, but you've clearly been in the industry for a long time, and you've seen a lot of the other industries and how things have evolved and the coming together of the ecosystem. But what do you see in the next 5 years? 10 years?
I literally just came off our board meeting last week, the Anterix board meeting, and we're honored. We just had Tom Kuhn, who, as you know, just retired after 3 decades of work as our sector's leader at EEI. I mean, there's no one who's been more of a visionary and seen more of the power of the collective action of this industry. And so he sat in our last board meeting for the first time, and it plays into the idea of getting to hear his view of kind of where we are and where we must go. This isn't a hey, it would be nice to have this, but we must go places, and that's kind of the way he's led, and I couldn't agree more about it. So when we talk about UBBA, we have a really meaningful mission to be this enabling platform, right? A fabric of broadband, private, secure communications that has to enable these things that must occur, right? It's not an option. I always wonder what would have happened if we didn't come along as Utility Broadband Alliance and utilities weren't doing this. We'd have a lot more issues going on. So, what do we have to do in the future? I mean, our assignment, enabling our member utilities and their respective parts of their organization to, we got some pretty serious cybersecurity challenges, right? The FBI spoke at a Senate hearing last week, I think it was. They're talking about the level of incidences that are already occurred. It's the first time they really spoke publicly about a lot of this stuff. And it's obvious there's a growing security threat. And, there's no option to put devices, controllers, monitors, IT or OT on a publicly accessible network. I mean, just, we saw the result of that. Basically they said they, had already installed the ability to shut down, water treatment plants, utilities, all of these critical assets that if we don't have those things for days, it wreaks, complete chaos within a society. And so, I mean, that's one really important one. I know it's escalating within utilities, it's escalating within the conversation at UBBA in the future. And so that's something we are working actively with the members of UBBA through our ecosystem program as well to really pull in a lot of the leading cyber thinkers and vendors to integrate solutions, right? I mean, at the end of the day, another sort of key future thing to me, right? I mentioned we've got utilities in 15 states already on 900. We've got what Southern's doing. We've got a long list of, as you know, all the participants and members of UBBA that haven't yet made the commitment but are planning how they're going to move forward. We have to stitch together that fabric, to me, of each one of them has to have their own autonomous, valuable network for all the reasons we know about why private is essential for each utility. They must control to have the resiliency that they require, not what a third party is going to provide them. And so, but as you connect the dots between those networks, and we're already seeing it, as Southern is leading in to potentially host other networks, as neighboring utilities like Ameren and Evergy, have their mutual aid already in place and have the ability to work together and share resources. There's this network effect, right? The Metcalfe law that basically says the more elements you plug into a network, the more valuable the network becomes itself. Kind of a simple principle, but the idea that, pick anything. So cyber, for example, right? If an incident happens in Alabama, that's the same pattern that's happening in Missouri, how fast can that information flow from one to the other, right? And so first you have to detect it, right? And to detect it, you have to have lots of sensors out there monitoring everything possible, right? And so these networks are going to enable that, right? We see the planned deployment curves of utilities when they start thinking about broadband versus once they already are deploying, almost always they're increasing. I saw that in the wireless world. We built models in the 90s that said, yeah, maybe we'll get to 10% penetration of cell phones, in the US if we're really lucky. And now everybody has 2. We were like at 150% in the US. And so, and the same thing with data usage. Maybe they'll use a kilobyte of data, in a month, and now we're, inhaling gigabytes in a day. And so this is going to be the same thing. As soon as the understanding of what this really can do, and it's a fixed cost, right? When you put this network out to solve, look at SDG&E's great deployment where they're already detecting, a falling line before it hits the ground, and that, stopping a wildfire. That's just one application, like an app on your phone where, you can hail Uber taxis, but at the same time, you can download another app that's going to do, great things on safety or monitoring or controls. This is the same thing. So to me, the future is about the applications. It's about the growing list of things with this significant investment that, it's challenging to get rationalized within the management and rate cases. But once we have this fabric knit together, I think there's a network effect that's going to create even a multiplier value as well. And so when we start thinking about applications and capabilities across these networks with shared capabilities, I think that's really going to be exciting. The other one, you can't have a conversation today without talking about AI, right? And so, I've sat on a panel at EEI about AI and some fascinating thoughts there. And we've been talking to all these utilities about, where they're using it, where they foresee using it. But AI at the end of the day is, it's brilliance to process data to have some valuable outcome, right? And it's, all the brain power of every human, put together into a machine that can potentially take that data and do something, but it's only as good as the data that goes in, right? It's the old garbage in, garbage out issue. Today, utilities don't have great penetration of valuable data coming to them. I mean, they're doing the best they can with what they have, right? Utility data, meter data, other sensors, other data being collected by third parties. But when you envision the world of having, the global standard of LTE, right? 4G, 5G, LTE, these are low cost devices that, LCRA that used to put out, expensive flood monitoring devices that were custom made. Now they can put out on LTE a very low cost and have a lot more of them protecting, even greater protection of their community, because you can have greater deployment. It's the same thing that's going to happen here, that you're going to have so many more sensors available and controllers. And so what are we going to do with that, with the power of AI? That's exciting to me. It's daunting too, right? We know there's all kinds of issues, but if you're going to do it, you better do it on a firewalled, air-gapped network that no one else has any ability to get anywhere close to, versus trying to do that in some environment where you're sharing networks with nefarious parties, foreign governments, hackers, other people that might want to do other things with your controllers and capabilities. And so to me, that's a really exciting area. So and that's a perfect example of the power of us working together, right? Going back to really the purpose of UBBA. To me, I think that, we're going to solve those issues together, and we're going to look at all kinds of ways, and technology evolves, but it's about keeping this capability evergreen over those decades, continuing to support utilities and our nation in really solving these big problems. And I think UBBA's at such a great place. To me, the secret of success to date, and this is kind of, I think, really important, that it's because we've been so linearly focused on one important thing. It's how do we use private broadband networks to solve the current and future needs of our electric grid. And I think and domestically we're focused today. I think we've made a lot of progress, but I think we have to succeed at that before we think about expanding the bounds. And so we're on an amazing track, thanks to your leadership and really all of the members, the founding members, all those that have joined, the new board members. I'm very excited about, as every time we bring in new people to the group, right, brings in new perspectives. And I think we thought we knew everything, and now we know even more, and we keep learning. And so it's really been a fantastic journey.
Absolutely, Rob. Gosh, thank you for sharing your insights. I think you hit the nail on the head that we're not finished. We are staying focused on what the Utility Broadband Alliance was established to do. And I think that's critical. It sets us apart from other associations. It also gives us unique value. And we also continue to focus on exactly what the utility industry came to us all those years ago and asked us to do. And so I'm grateful for you and all of our leadership, and for our members who are willing to go down this path with us and continue to take it forward. Thank you so much, Rob, for being with us today, for taking time out of your schedule to share your insights, both backwards and forwards, as much as we're able. And then really for your dedication and rededication to the Utility Broadband Alliance. It means the world. As an individual, our utilities are the most critical. You said it. We can't go without these organizations, and to be any small part of this industry that brings power, water, gas, life to all of the people of our country, I think is really important. And so it's an honor to be part of this.
Thank you, Bobbi, so much. My only last comment is just inviting everyone to join us in this journey and voyage. I know that we've got so many new members. There's so many more out there. I think it's the learnings and capabilities in driving this new digital foundation is available at their fingertips. And thanks to your leadership, I'm looking forward to where we take it from here. Thanks again.
Thank you, Rob. For everyone else, thank you for joining us today. I encourage our viewers, if you have questions about UBBA, about any of the topics you've heard today, please reach out. Visit UBBA.com or reach out on social media. We'll be happy to talk with you. And until next time, I'm Bobbi Harris. It's an honor. Thank you.